All right, I'm going to get started, and hopefully we have some other people jump in. And uh, if you could look at the note sheet that I posted a little bit below on Google Classroom, I think it's like two announcements below. That's going to be really helpful because today we have a pretty rough day in that we're going through industrialization, revolutions of the 1800s, early isms, and reform, which is absolutely brutal. But that's what we're going to be doing today, which is a lot of like minutia. So if you have your note sheet out today, it'll probably be way more important than, like when we do French Revolution and Napoleon, where you can kind of just like follow along because there's, like a story that we're kind of running through there. To start off with, where it says the Atlantic economy, although I am going back in time a little bit from the French Revolution, there wasn't a super good place to fit this in. So I'm just kind of fitting it in right here. With the Atlantic economy, the most important thing is, when we're dealing with exploration and the setting up of colonies in the New World, mercantilism is the most important thing. That, money equals power. You want to have a favorable balance of trade, more exports than imports, and that, under mercantilism, the mother country benefits and, the colony is just there to serve the mother country. You could almost look at the mother country as like a parasite on the colony. The colony exists for the mother country. So that's mercantilism. Remember, bullion is gold and silver. That's how money is measured. Two things that developed during mercantilism is the Mississippi bubble and the South Sea bubble that I want to point out. These were both investments on colonies that do not play out. The Mississippi Company was specifically the area of the Mississippi, Louisiana. And they had all these people invest because there's going to be all this money to be made there, and there's no money to be made there, and everyone loses their money, and it's a disaster. So that would be two examples of mercantilism gone wrong. With the Mississippi bubble in France, we have a complete collapse of the economy. On the English end, we have the South Sea bubble. That is not going to end in a complete collapse. That is going to be salvaged by the English government. All the money is going to be paid back out, and the English government will be able to pull that back together. But almost goes down with the South Sea bubble as well. So just keep those two bubbles in mind, and you'll be good with that. 7 Years' War is another little thing with mercantilism that I didn't get into. The 7 Years' War is a massive war where basically you've got England and Prussia, Pitt for England, Frederick the Great for Prussia, excuse me, versus France, Spain, and Austria. On the Austrian end, you got Maria Theresa. On the French end, you have Louis the 15th. And those are our major players in this 7 Years' War. The main conflict will resolve itself in the New World, known as the French and Indian War, between the French and English for American colonies. The English will win that. This will cause the French on an economic downturn that will eventually result in the French Revolution, while England is going to rise to the most powerful nation in the world. On the continent of Europe, through a miraculous victory, Frederick the Great's going to come out on top, and Maria Theresa and Austria will once again lose some influence at the hands of Prussia. So 7 Years' War, we have a little changing of the guard there. England's going to really take the reins as far as colonies go, and Germany is really starting to take the reins as far as Central Europe and the Germanic people. So that's the Atlantic economy that I just wanted to go through real quick. Now, where it says the agricultural revolution there, I just want you to highlight that. The agricultural revolution is going to begin with what is known as the enclosure movement. This is the fencing off of nobles' lands to get rid of inefficient farmers and make food production more effective. The enclosure movement is going to cause the lives of possibly hundreds of thousands of English farmers that are kicked off their lands because they're not needed or considered to be substandard farmers. And they'll be forced to head into the cities to look for any kind of work they can find, which will most likely be factory work, which we're going to get into a second. So that's the enclosure movement. That's an important part of what's going on here during the Industrial Revolution. I'm sorry, the Agricultural Revolution. And also we're going to see developments in new farming techniques. So we've got Charles Townsend is going to develop what is known as crop rotation. And then Jethro Tull will invent the seed drill method. These are two improvements in farming. The last thing I'm going to say with the agricultural revolution, I can spend a lot of time with this, is the farming techniques are being improved in Western Europe, England, France, Netherlands, to a degree, Spain, Germany. But in Eastern Europe, specifically Russia, we don't really see an agricultural revolution. We don't see seed drill, crop rotation. We don't see any of that stuff. So we see a big switch in, the difference between how farming is done in the West than how farming is done in the East. So that's the agricultural revolution. And now we'll move down into where it says the industrial revolution. The industrial revolution is going to emerge out of what is known as the cottage industry. The cottage industry is farmers making goods for merchants in their homes during the winter time where they don't have a lot to do. And after that, they will sell that to the merchants in the spring, make a little money, and then go back to farming. So that's what the cottage industry is. The cottage industry worked very well until we have some key inventions. Some of the inventions are the spinning jenny by Hargreaves, the flying shuttle by John Kay, and these are inventions that help peasants produce mainly textiles or clothing in their home at a faster rate. The more pants you can produce in the winter, the more cash you get, so people want to maximize their production to get more money. I mean, it's, pretty self-explanatory. However, one key invention by Arkwright, which is known as the water frame, will change things. It's a combination of the spinning jenny and the flying shuttle. And the thing with the water frame is it needs a water source to operate it. So what Arkwright's going to do is he's going to build a bunch of these. He's going to put them in a big warehouse, a big building along a river. And then he says, come and work for me during the winter time. Show up, I'll give you some money. And, you can work my water frames. And then, in the spring, you can go back and, you can farm if you want to, or you can continue working for me, and make some good money. So, the water frame will really move us from the cottage industry, which is manufacturing at home, to the factory system, which is where you're going to a building and using the machines, and that's what you got going on with the factory system. I'm not going to spend a whole bunch of time on working in factories. I think we've spent a bunch of time with that. Long hours, horrible pay, horrible conditions that people live in, slums, filth, tenements. I think you're pretty good on that. So I'm not going to go through the horrible conditions of workers in the industrialization period, but just know that it is horrible, and we spent some time talking about that. Now, with the situation of industrialization and these people getting paid super horrible money and living in bad places and all these exploitations that happen, we're going to start to see some reforms take place in England. And these reforms will occur mainly after the Napoleonic Wars. And they're going to be a response to not only industrialization, but laws that are put into place to keep the poor middle-class people down and accentuate the wealthy. The most famous example of this is the Corn Laws. So make sure you highlight Corn Laws in your notes there. And the Corn Laws are the artificial raising of corn and wheat prices in England on specifically foreign corn and wheat. So that people would be forced to buy English corn and wheat. And basically, in the end, it raises all corn and wheat prices artificially higher than anyone else in the world is paying for these goods. And that's all to keep the middle class and the poor poor and the wealthy wealthy. So the Corn Laws are an attempt to strengthen the wealth of the English nobility. So just keep that in mind with the Corn Laws. Pretty quickly, people begin to pick this out. Okay, William Cobbett is a famous English newspaper writer that writes the Political Registrar. That's going to expose, hey, listen, the Corn Law, everybody, is ripping you off. And the government don't like this. The nobles in charge don't like the fact that Cobbett's, blowing up their little scandal here. So they're going to pass what's called the Coercion Act, which basically says if they think that you're doing anything to sabotage the government, then they can throw you in jail for a couple months and crack down on you. Certainly the end-all be-all here is to keep the power within the wealthy, all right? I don't want you having illusions on that. However, I will say that we are coming after the French Revolution here, and everyone's concerned that it's going to be, English Revolution, English Reign of Terror, English guillotine, like all this stuff. So there is some concern on the government's end that, there could be an actual overthrow, but the main reason is to keep the power within the elite. Now, with the Coercion Act, we're going to have what is known as the Peterloo Massacre. We're going to have a big protest at, what is known as the Spa Fields I'm sorry, what is going to be known as Peterloo Square. And you've got a whole bunch of people gather there. They're arguing to get rid of the Corn Laws. They're arguing for more rights and privileges amongst the working class. Long story short, the government comes in on horseback. They kill a couple people, kill a baby in the process. It's very, very horrible. And, this kind of shows that England is maybe on the verge of a complete and utter revolution. So what England's going to do is they're going to pass the 6 Acts. I'm not going to go through all the 6 Acts, but just know the 6 Acts are regulatory measures to oppress the middle class and poor people and keep them in line. There's taxes put on newspapers so poor people can't get information. There's limits put on assembly. There's limits put on speech. So you can be thrown in jail for up to a year for just, telling lies or what the government feels is lies against the government. So the 6 Acts is an oppressive move that's put on the people as a result of the Peterloo Massacre. The last thing I want to point out in that regard is we're going to have the Cato Street conspiracy, where a couple middle-class English people are going to try to blow up Parliament because of the 6 Acts. It backfires, they get arrested and the government goes, this is why we have to have the 6 Acts, because of these nut jobs out there. So that's the Cato Street conspiracy. If you move down a little bit, we've got the Charterists or the Chartist movement. This is a collection of workers that are working for better wages and working conditions, basically what unions are going to be. And they also want voter reform, secret, ballot, restrictions on who can be in Parliament, all kinds of different changes, which are there in your notes. I'm not going to run through all the changes, but there are a lot of different changes that would benefit the worker or the working class. Although the Chartist movement is going to gain a lot of support, and they're going to present a legendarily massive petition to Parliament, and at times can get very aggressive. They're going to try to assassinate Victoria on a couple occasions. The movement will go nowhere. They just don't have the power and influence to push this through. However, although the Chartists do fail, they are the first movement for reform in England, and all of the things the Chartists want within 30 or 40 years is going to be passed. That all these reforms are going to be done. So the Chartists themselves will not be very successful, but they get the ball rolling on reforms that will happen in the future. So they're a very important movement. William Lovett is a famous Chartist, and another guy, famous Chartist, is a guy named Samuel Smiles. I'm not sure if those guys are there for you. Just kind of glancing real quick here. Yeah, I don't see him there. Oh, yeah, William Lovett's there. But I don't see Samuel Smiles. So just know those guys are some famous Chartists. The last thing I wanted to mention as far as English early industrialization and reform is where it says the Great Reform Bill of 1832. This is a very important bill that's going to expand the voting population in England, grant more voting power to middle class. Your everyday worker still does not have, the benefit of voting. But we are starting to see now, more voting and civil rights to middle class. So the Great Reform Bill of 1832 is important for that reason. So that's pretty much it for, some early English reform and early English industrialization. And where it says 19th century isms, I want to quickly go through that. And I'll begin where it says conservatism. Just know that conservatives are people that don't want things to change in the 19th century. I wouldn't say that's conservatives today. But, in the 19th century, that certainly is the case. They want the church and the nobility and the king to stay on the throne. They do not believe in religious toleration. And conservatives could be made up by guys like Metternich. He's a classic conservative. Another guy during the French Revolution, English guy named Edmund Burke, who felt that the French Revolution was going to spin out of control because the middle class was too stupid to run the country, which the French Revolution does spin out of control, but it's not because the middle class is too stupid to run the country. So these are some examples of conservatives. Now, liberals are people that are really looking for any kind of change, religious toleration, a more democratic say in government, maybe a republic or a constitutional monarchy. A lot of our early socialists would be considered liberals. I'm not sure if I mentioned this, but people that want religious toleration would be considered liberals. So liberals are people that want change. John Stuart Mill would be a good example of a liberal. These are people that are looking to reform the current situation. Liberals also tend to be nationalists. So, like, if you're a German that wants Germany reunited, you're going to be a liberal. And that's because if you're a Prussian noble, you don't want that to happen. You want Prussia to stay Prussia so that you can be Duke of, Brandenburg. So, liberals tend to be nationalists as well. Now, economic liberalism, guys like David Ricardo and Malthus are kind of extending Smith's ideology of laissez-faire. So, liberals feel that the government should just allow business to compete and that the government should not regulate business and should just stay out. And Ricardo and Malthus will actually apply some of these tactics to, industry itself, where Ricardo famously says, hey, listen, we got a population problem, just let these poor people die. The market doesn't demand that they get paid any more than they get paid, so just follow the market. And if some people die, don't worry about it because, you're helping global population. So that's economic liberalism. Utilitarianism is Jeremy Bentham. He's the freak that got embalmed. I showed you his messed up head. And Jeremy Bentham believes in utilitarianism, which states that a government must provide the greatest amount of good for the greatest amount of people. And if a government's not doing that, then the government is not a good government and it should be destroyed. If the government's only providing benefits for the minority of the population, then it's a poor government and it needs to be done away with. And certainly, Jeremy Bentham is talking about an aristocracy. If the government's providing the large S for the aristocracy, well, that's a garbage government, and you should get rid of it. Our last one is socialism. Socialism is the redistribution of national wealth. Now, socialism can be a redistribution of wealth in a lot of different ways, okay? You can have limited socialism. You can have, significant socialism. Communism would be our most radical form of socialism. So there's a lot of different areas you can go within socialism. Our country is applying socialistic ideas right now, so socialism really can be adapted in a lot of different situations, but it is a redistributing of wealth any way you look at socialism. Now, some of our early socialisms are utopian socialism, and I'm not going to go through all these utopian socialists, but Saint-Simonism, Fourierism, and Owenism are three of your classics. And just know that these are not socialistic systems that they thought government should like immediately apply. These were socialist systems that are like, wouldn't it be great if we could do this? Or isn't this an interesting way to apply socialism? So it's more of like fantasy socialism than like plans that they thought could practically be implemented. So that's the beginning of socialism. Now, going down a little bit further, you're going to see some radical socialism, which is Marxism, which will bring us into communism. Marxism is the brainchild of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels in their book, The Communist Manifesto. A couple key attributes to Marxism. The violent revolution, the workers are going to have to violently overthrow their factory owners and their government and take the money from them because the wealthy people aren't going to give you the money. It is a redistribution of wealth completely. So, under Marxism, all money is taken, all money is held by the government, and all money is redistributed to people equally amongst the country. So, it's not you're paying 80% of your money in taxes like Norway. He's got some pretty significant socialism. It's, all your money is taken and redistributed amongst the people. So that's a key thing of communism. And then finally, in communism, there's no religion. So no Christianity, no Buddhism, no Hinduism. That it's a big aspect of communism. There's no religion allowed. This would be our most radical form of communism, where we're looking at a complete redistribution of wealth. Now, it is also the most popular form of socialism, in that when we're looking at our different forms, communism is the most accepted. So I guess you could say communism is the popular kid amongst the socialist group. The last thing I wanted to mention is the First and Second Internationals. These are meetings of socialists to discuss the future of socialism. And also, when we're looking at socialism, and I'll come up with this a little bit later too, socialism, the big question is violent revolution, or can it be implemented through the government? So you have a lot of socialists that say, hey, if you want socialism, vote in a socialist. If you want socialism, pick Bernie Sanders. He'll pass socialist policies and you'll have socialism, and there's no need to grab a gun and run out on the street and have a revolution. Other people say, no, it's never going to work. Capitalism's always going to muddy that up, and we need a complete armed revolution to establish communism, our most radical form of socialism. So, there's different ways that people are debating implementing socialism in this First and Second International. So that is Marxism. And now we're going to go down to some just early reform, and then we'll get into the revolutions, the 1830s, 1848s, and we're done. All right. So hopefully I can move through this at a relatively decent pace for you. When we're looking at reforms after the Napoleonic Wars, we're mainly looking at reforms in Germany to begin with, in that, when the war comes to an end, the Germans realize that one of the reasons that Napoleon's able to just absolutely destroy Germany is that the Germans aren't working together. The thought was, hey, if the Germans could just come together as a group, then we could whoop up on the French. So the thought is, to create some kind of German unity. And what's established is the German Confederation. It's held by the Austrians. Metternich's going to be the head guy. And this is going to be an opportunity for all the German states to meet and make decisions that are best for all of them. It's the first step towards unification, the German Confederation. So just keep that in mind. One of the areas that we'll start to see come up in Germany is the Burschenschaften. These are student organizations focused on nationalist aims. So, let's bring Germany together as a country. Prussia needs to lead it. And these student organizations, like Key Club on steroids, it's all over Germany. It's a pretty harmless situation. One guy's always got to ruin the party, and a guy named Carl Sand is going to end up killing a prominent German reporter. And, this is just all the old people needed, they're already upset about these kids out there having fun and, having keggers and celebrating nationalism. And now this reporter dies and they're like, see, all these kids, they're out of control. And what's going to happen is what's called the Carlsbad decrees. which are going to shut down Burschenschaftens, put police officers in classrooms to stop people like me from inciting up the youth on nationalism. And these are some reforms that are put on German nationalism to kind of curb it a little bit because people think it's getting out of control. Now, if you go down to where it says reform and revolutions, I am going to go through major reforms in France and Austria, a little bit in Germany, and that's it. I'm not going to do Russian reforms today. We might pick it up next week. I don't really think it's going to help you too much on the test, but I might pick up like Alexander the second and some of those, Alexander the third, and some of those reforms. We'll see if we got the time. But I think the French and English and Austrian reforms are going to be our most important. So we're looking at our French reforms. If you could just look where it says the Revolution of 1830. Louis XVIII is going to die. His brother Charles X is going to come into power. Charles X, he wants to be an absolute monarch. Those days are over in France. I mean, even his bro Louis XVIII understood that. And in his attempt to create an absolute monarchy by trying to get rid of the legislature and everything else that's going on in France, he is going to be overthrown with what is known as the July Revolution. And it will occur in 1830, so Charles X is on the throne. 1830 comes. We have the July Revolution. Charles X is overthrown. He tried to pass those 4 ordinances, which basically make him like, the absolute monarch. The people won't take it, and he runs away to England. Now, he's going to be replaced by a man named Louis Philippe, who is known as the liberal monarch. One thing I wanted to mention about liberalism was we talked a little bit about liberalism. I went through some of the characteristics of liberalism and conservatism. One thing that liberals and conservatives have in common, if you're looking for a commonality between those two, is they both hate the poor. So, rich people don't like the poor, and the middle class people don't like the poor. Middle class people look at poor as lazy. So under his liberal government, the poor will not be taken care of. And this is going to cause all kinds of protests and problems. And eventually this will lead to the Revolution of 1848, where Louis Philippe's liberal monarchy is overthrown. And he is going to be replaced by Louis Napoleon, who is Napoleon Bonaparte's nephew. Now, he's going to win in on pure name recognition. It's just, hey, we've gone through a bunch of governments here. Maybe Napoleon's blood here will help us out. Excuse me. However, Louis Napoleon, although pretending to want a republic, will pretty quickly assume absolute control. He will create himself as a dictator, and he will be known as Napoleon III, and he'll be running France like a dictator. Most of Louis Napoleon's reign, we don't really have to get into. And I'll mention this next week when we do German nationalism, but Louis Napoleon is going to be toppled in the Franco-Prussian War when Otto von Bismarck comes in with the Prussians and smack the French down and creates Germany. That's going to be the end of Napoleon III. So that's when his reign comes to an end, which I'll get into a little bit more next week. So that is it for revolutions of France in 1848. And now if you just go down, we're going to do the Habsburg Revolution 1848, and then I think we'll be good. So when we're looking at Austria, I've mentioned before, Austria is a war-torn nightmare. I'm sorry, a cultural and war-torn nightmare. It's been ripped up by the Napoleonic Wars. And then you've got all these different cultures. You've got, the Serbs and the Croats and the Germans and the Italians and the Poles and Slavs. And you've got all these different groups. And the Germans who are running Austria, the Habsburgs, are trying to keep all of this in play, and it's becoming difficult. What we're going to see in 1848 is what's known as the Vienna Uprising. Hungarian students in Vienna begin to riot and protest for more expanded rights for Hungary. The Holy Roman Emperor at this time, or the King of Austria at this time, Ferdinand II, is incapable of dealing with this uprising. He's mentally handicapped and he can't make himself go in and kill these students, and he kind of lets it get out of control. And then what happens is all of Hungary revolts. They're like, man, if the Austrians aren't going to stop this, that was our moment. And this is sometimes known as the Magyar revolt. Magyar and Hungarians are just interchangeable terms. Magyar is actually kind of a nasty name for Hungarians because it's their barbarian name. But it's the same thing, just so you know. This will occur in Budapest, which is the capital of modern-day Hungary, and the Hungarians are basically looking for independence. We don't really need to get into all the details of the March laws, but they're looking for independence. Now, when they break away, the Czechs will also break away, the Italians will break away, and now everyone's trying to get out. Ferdinand will have to abdicate power. He just simply cannot deal with it. Joseph II is going to come in. He's going to rally the troops. They're going to come in, smash all of these revolts, and Austria is going to be held together. So the end all of the Austrian revolt of 1848 is the conservatives are going to win. Austria is going to be held together. The only other revolt we have, which I didn't even put in your notes because I don't really think it's confusing because it doesn't fully work as a revolt, is the Berlin Revolt, where you have college students looking for more say in government. The big thing here, though, is that William III is going to come in and he is going to grant more say in government and promise to work for nationalization. So even though there is a protest in Berlin, their needs are satisfied. So there's not a real revolt. Like there's no real armed conflict there. They basically say, we want this from the king, and the king says, I will work to give you that. And they're like, okay, so that's how that comes to an end. But it does happen in 1848. So, technically as part of the revolutions of 1848. I want to end today with the key point of the revolutions of 1848, and that is that they are a victory for conservatism. These are all liberal reforms, trying to create, new states and constitutional monarchies and, all this stuff. But in the end, monarchs stay in power. That does not happen in France. Napoleon III, becomes a dictator. It does not happen in Austria. It stays together. Now, here's the Berlin situation. I would still say it's a victory for conservatives, but it's muddy because there is some concessions there for the liberals. So, if you had a situation where it was maybe I can't imagine this question, but if it was talk about some liberal outcomes of the revolutions of 1848, the Prussians did pull off some concessions. So there is a little bit there for the Prussians. That is all I got for you today. I appreciate the 3 of you that showed up. Obviously I like to see a lot more on there. I am recording them, and I guess I'd be recording them anyway, so I guess it is what it is. But if you see people, Fridays and Tuesdays are our days, so if people could get on, that'd be great. Does anybody have any questions on the content, DBQs, or any of the test stuff? I put a whole bunch of stuff, like maybe one post below this one that has all the stuff for signing up on the test, how you can test out that your phone works, all that kind of stuff. So please make sure you look at that. And if you have any questions on that, feel free to ask me. Anything I can do for you before the weekend here? If you turn your mics off, you're happy to. Everyone's good? Okay, well, I really appreciate the 3 of you that showed up today. At least I'm not here alone. I'm going to be going again Tuesday, and I will have all the DBQs that were submitted graded by then, and I can give you some feedback. I can answer any questions on DBQs. Both the 3rd one that I just issued, or if you do the 1st and 2nd, and you got any questions on that, I'd be happy to answer them. So have a good weekend. Thanks for showing up.